My name is Michael Torres. I carried a badge for 27 years with the Oregon State Highway Patrol, and for most of that time, fear was a luxury I didn't believe in. I worked collisions where bodies were folded into metal like paper. I knocked on doors at dawn and watched families collapse in slow motion. I stood alone on frozen highways, gun in hand, knowing help was miles away. None of it shook my understanding of the world. Things happened for reasons. People made bad choices. Darkness was something you could point a flashlight at and push back. I was trained to observe, not imagine, to trust what could be measured, photographed, logged, and filed away. Hallucinations were for the sleep-deprived or the unstable, not for men who knew the weight of procedure and muscle memory. I never saw things that weren't there. I never heard voices that didn't come from a radio or another human mouth. I believed that if something couldn't be explained, it was only because the explanation hadn't been found yet. That belief cost me everything. I didn't leave the force because I lost my nerve. I didn't crack under pressure or make a mistake that buried my career. I walked away because there are places where experience doesn't protect you, where seniority means nothing, and where the rules you live by simply stop applying. I gave up my pension, my uniform, and the only life I ever understood because staying would have meant pretending that what I saw wasn't real. I am writing this now because I am running out of time, and because some truths don't care whether you believe in them or not. Highway 40 was never a road you chose unless you had to. It cut through miles of pine forest where the trees grew so close together they blocked out the sky. Even during the day, at night, it felt sealed off from the rest of Oregon, like a forgotten line scratched through the wilderness. No gas stations, no houses, no light except your own headlights and whatever the moon managed to leak through the branches. I had patrolled that stretch for years, long enough to memorize every bend, every uneven patch of asphalt, every mile marker standing like a lonely witness. That night, I was working graveyard alone. My usual partner, Johnson, had called in sick near the end of second shift, so dispatch reassigned me to run solo. It wasn't unusual. You didn't get nervous about being alone out there. You learned to respect the silence, not fear it. Most nights. Highway 49 was dead. No traffic, no calls, just the steady hum of tires and the occasional radio check to remind yourself still existed. The air was cold and dry when I started my patrol, the kind that keeps you alert. Around 2 in the morning, the fog began to form without warning, rolling in low and thick between the trees. It didn't drift like normal fog. It gathered. Visibility dropped fast, shrinking the world down to the narrow cone of my headlights. The forest pressed closer, and the road I knew by heart started to feel unfamiliar, as if it had shifted slightly out of place. I remember thinking how quiet everything had become, even for that road. No wind, no animals, just me, the cruiser, and Highway 49 stretching forward into something I couldn't quite see. By the time the clock on my dashboard crept past 3, the fog had fully claimed Highway 49. It wasn't just thick, it was deliberate, clinging low to the asphalt and rising in slow curls around the trees, as if the forest itself were breathing. My headlights cut into it like knives into fabric, revealing only fragments of the road before everything closed in again. Familiar landmarks vanished. Mile markers appeared too late, then slipped away in the mirrors. The sense of distance collapsed, leaving me unsure how long I had been driving the same stretch. I eased off the accelerator, listening to the crunch of tires on damp pavement. The radio crackled with static that came and went without explanation. I remember feeling a mild irritation more than fear, the annoyance of conditions complicating an otherwise routine shift. Still, something felt subtly wrong. The fog didn't move with the cruiser. It didn't scatter when I passed through it. It waited, settled, and then folded back in behind me. At exactly 3:33 a.m., my eyes flicked to the clock without conscious thought. And that was when I saw the hazard lights ahead, two dull amber flashes pulsing through the fog, steady and patient. They didn't belong there. I knew that immediately. Cars didn't stop on that part of Highway 49 unless something had gone badly wrong. As I slowed and guided the cruiser toward the shoulder, a cold certainty settled in my gut. The road I had trusted for years was no longer the road I understood, and whatever waited ahead had already decided I was part of it. The digital clock on my dashboard flipped to 3:33 a.m. with a soft click, the kind you only notice when the night is quiet enough to hear everything. I remember that number because it stuck in my head immediately, sharp and intrusive, like it didn't belong there. I had been scanning the shoulder through the fog when the flashing lights emerged again. Clearer now, pulsing amber in a steady, almost reassuring rhythm. Hazard lights. Not frantic, not recent panic. Just on. I slowed the cruiser and felt the familiar shift in my body as training took over. Hands steady on the wheel, eyes moving, cataloging details. The fog thinned just enough for the shape of the car to come into view. A silver sedan sitting at an awkward angle, its rear tire nearly kissing the white line. It hadn't slid. It had been placed there. The driver's door was open wide, frozen in that position, as if whoever stepped out hadn't bothered to close it, or simply forgot. No movement, no silhouettes in the trees, no sound but my engine idling and the soft tick of cooling metal. I called the plate into dispatch, my voice calm, professional, unchanged by the way the air suddenly felt heavier around the cruiser. As I stepped out, the cold bit through my uniform, sharper than it should have been. The fog swallowed the red and blue reflections almost instantly, leaving me standing alone in a narrow bubble of light. I didn't know it then, but that timestamp, 3:33 a.m., was the last ordinary moment of my career. The exact second my understanding of that road began to unravel. The first thing that struck me was how wrong the car looked sitting there. It wasn't disabled in the usual way, nose dipped or hood up. It rested half on the shoulder, half on the road, as if the driver had changed his mind mid-stop and never finished the thought. The hazard lights continued their slow blink, each flash briefly painting the fog in dull amber before it swallowed the light again. I approached from the rear, one hand resting near my holster out of habit. Not fear. The driver's door stood wide open. Not cracked, not hurriedly left ajar. Open all the way. Hinges locked. Interior exposed to the cold night air. That bothered me more than anything else. People close doors, even panicked people. Leaving a door like that felt intentional, like an invitation or a signal meant for someone else. I leaned in and swept the interior with my flashlight. Empty seat, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Keys dangled from the ignition, gently swaying with the breeze. A wallet lay on the passenger seat, thick with cards, cash still visible. A laptop bag rested in the back, clean and untouched. Nothing had been taken. Nothing appeared out of place. The radio murmured quietly behind me. Dispatch, acknowledging the plate I'd called in, grounding me for a moment in routine. Then I noticed the smell of coffee. Fresh. I reached for the travel mug in the cup holder and felt warmth seep into my palm. Whoever had been driving this car hadn't been gone long at all, standing there in the fog, with the open door breathing cold into the cabin. I realized I wasn't looking at the aftermath of an accident. I was standing at the edge of something interrupted. I stood there longer than I should have, my hand still wrapped around the travel mug, as if letting go might erase what it meant. The warmth was undeniable, seeping through the plastic and into my fingers, grounding and wrong at the same time. Coffee cools fast on cold nights, especially with a door left open. This wasn't leftover heat. This was recent. Whoever had been driving had stepped away minutes ago, not hours. The idea settled in my chest with quiet weight. I scanned the road again, sweeping my flashlight through the fog, half expecting a figure to stumble back toward the car in confusion or embarrassment. Nothing moved. The forest absorbed the beam without reflecting it back, the trees standing too still, too patient. I listened for footsteps, for a voice, for any sign of someone just out of sight. The only response was the steady click of the hazard lights and the distant hiss of fog sliding across asphalt. Training pushed me forward. I radioed dispatch to update the situation, reported an apparently abandoned vehicle with a possibly missing driver. My voice sounded steady in my own ears, but the words felt thin, inadequate for what I was seeing. People didn't walk away from warm coffee in the middle of nowhere. They didn't leave wallets, phones, and open doors behind unless something had forced them to. As I lowered the mug back into the cup holder, I noticed the footprints near the shoulder for the first time. Clear impressions in the damp dirt, pointed away from the road and straight toward the trees. They weren't scattered or uncertain. They were purposeful, standing there, alone in the fog. I realized I wasn't waiting for the driver to come back. I was about to follow him into the dark. Dispatch came back with the name while I was still standing beside the open door, fog curling lazily around my boots. Marcus Webb, 34, Portland, Oregon. No warrants, no flags. Clean record. Just another ordinary name that shouldn't have ended up stranded on Highway 49 in the middle of the night. I repeated it quietly to myself, the way officers do when trying to turn a stranger into a person. Marcus Webb, someone's son, someone's friend, a man who had woken up that morning assuming he would make it home. I looked through the car again, slower this time, matching the details to the name. The wallet confirmed it. A driver's license with a bland photo and tired eyes. Credit cards neatly arranged. $60 folded once. Still crisp. The cell phone showed a full battery and no missed calls since earlier that evening. Whatever had pulled Marcus Webb out of his car, it hadn't been another human being. There were no signs of a struggle, no torn fabric, no scuffed marks on the doorframe or seat. The laptop bag in his back suggested he'd been traveling for work, maybe cutting through Highway 49 to save time. I pictured him stopping briefly, stepping out for air or to check his bearings in the fog, never imagining it would matter. That thought tightened something in my chest. People disappear in cities all the time. Out here, it felt personal, as if the forest had chosen him specifically. I logged his information and stared into the trees where the footprints led. Knowing his name made the silence heavier. It was no longer an abandoned vehicle. It was the beginning of a missing person case, and I was the only one standing close enough to see where it truly started. I've seen what real theft looks like. I've seen cars stripped down to frames, windows smashed, glove boxes turned inside out. This wasn't that. The interior of Marcus Webb's Honda looked untouched, almost careful, like no one had wanted to disturb it. His wallet sat openly on the passenger seat, cash still visible, credit cards unbent, untested. The phone rested in the console, screen dark, battery full. No frantic calls, no unanswered messages piling up. If someone had meant to take his life, they hadn't bothered to take his things. That detail mattered more than it should have. People protect what's valuable, even when they're scared. They grab phones. They shove wallets into pockets. They lock doors out of instinct. Marcus Webb had done none of that. Everything he owned, everything that tied him to the world beyond this road, had been left behind as if it no longer served a purpose. The open laptop bag in the back seat sealed it for me. Expensive, portable, exactly the kind of thing that disappears first. It hadn't been touched. I checked the surrounding brush for signs of a struggle and found nothing. No broken branches, no dragged marks, no footprints circling back toward the road. Just that clean, deliberate path leading into the trees. Standing there, I felt the rules shifting under my feet. Robbery was out. Violence didn't fit. Even panic didn't explain it. The scene felt paused, not abandoned, like Marcus had stepped away expecting to return any second. That was the moment I understood something was wrong in a way paperwork couldn't explain. This wasn't about what had been taken. It was about what had been willingly left behind. The footprints began at the edge of the shoulder, pressed deep into the damp soil where the fog had settled overnight. They were clear, recent, and unmistakably human. I crouched to examine them, noting the tread pattern and size, already thinking in terms of reports and measurements. They pointed straight toward the trees, not angled, not wandering. Whoever made them hadn't hesitated. There was no sign of confusion, no pacing back and forth, no half circles that suggested someone realizing they'd gone the wrong way. The path was a decision, clean and final. I followed them slowly, counting steps without realizing I was doing it. The beam of my flashlight bounced off trunks and low branches, revealing just enough to keep me moving. Each print remained sharp and intact, the forest floor accepting them like it had been waiting. The deeper I went, the more the world behind me faded. Road noise vanished first. Then the faint glow of my cruiser lights dissolved into fog. All that remained was my breathing and the steady crunch of boots matching another man's steps. About 50 feet in, the footprints stopped. Not faded, not smeared. Stopped. The last print was perfect. Heel down, toe lifting, frozen in the act of taking another step that never happened. I stared at it, waiting for my eyes to adjust, for the next mark to appear just beyond my light. There was nothing. No disturbance, no broken twigs, no sign of a fall or a turn. It was as if Marcus Webb had been lifted straight up and removed from the scene. The forest felt closer then, tight and attentive, standing there with nowhere else to follow. I understood I had reached the end of logic and the beginning of something that didn't need tracks to move. It's strange how quickly the world can disappear. 50 feet isn't a distance you notice under normal circumstances. It's a few seconds of walking, a handful of steps, but somewhere between the shoulder of Highway 49 and the place where the footprints ended. Everything familiar dropped away. The hum of the cruiser faded first, swallowed so completely it felt like someone had turned it off by hand. Then the road itself ceased to exist, erased behind a wall of fog and trees that offered no hint it had ever been there. The forest changed the deeper I went. The air grew heavier, damp and cold, carrying a smell like wet soil and old bark. My flashlight seemed weaker, its beam absorbed instead of reflected, as if the darkness had weight. Sounds didn't travel correctly. The snap of a twig under my boot didn't echo. Even my own breathing felt muted, trapped close to my chest. It was the kind of silence that makes you acutely aware of your heartbeat. I remember glancing back, expecting to see the faint red-blue glow of my cruiser cutting through the fog. There was nothing. No light. No outline of the road. Just trees packed tightly together, their trunks forming a rough wall in every direction. for the first time that night. A thin thread of unease worked its way under my training. I wasn't lost. Not technically. But the sense of direction I'd relied on for decades no longer applied. Standing there, barely 50 feet from safety, I realized the forest didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, as if I had crossed an unmarked boundary and stepped into a place that was fully aware of me being there. I kept my eyes on this ground, forcing myself to stay focused on what could be measured and confirmed. The last footprint sat directly in the center of my flashlight beam. So sharply defined, it looked staged. The heel was deep, the toe lifted, frozen in motion. I circled it once, careful not to disturb the soil, searching for any sign I might have missed. A slip, a stumble, a turn to the side. There was nothing. The earth around it was untouched, smooth in a way the forest floor never is. I extended the beam farther ahead, sweeping left to right, then forward again, expecting the next print to reveal itself just beyond the edge of the light. It never did. The space in front of that final step was pristine, as if no one had ever walked there at all. My mind reached for explanations out of habit. Jump, fall, someone doubling back. None of them fit. A man doesn't vanish in mid-stride without leaving a trace. I felt a pressure building behind my ears, a low, uncomfortable sensation like altitude change. The fog thickened around my knees, curling and shifting without wind. I straightened slowly, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt standing in that small clearing of light. Instinct told me to mark the spot, to back away, to call for backup and wait. Procedure demanded distance. Instead, I stood there, staring at the absence in front of me. The missing step wasn't just a physical gap. It was a break in sequence, a place where cause and effect had been quietly severed. Whatever had taken Marcus Webb hadn't needed to run or hide. It had simply reached the point where the next step should have been, and decided he didn't need one. I was still staring at the empty space beyond the last footprint when I heard it. At first, I thought it was my own breathing, the sound bending strangely in the fog. Then the syllables separated themselves from the silence. Quiet, but deliberate. Spoken close enough that I felt them, more than heard them. Officer Torres. My name landed with weight. Not shouted, not questioned. Stated, calmly, as if the speaker had been waiting for the right moment to say it. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight raised, heart suddenly loud in my ears. The beam caught nothing but tree trunks and drifting fog. No movement, no faces, no place a voice should have come from. I answered out of reflex, the way you do when a civilian calls to you. "State Patrol," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Who's there?" There was no immediate reply, just a pause long enough for me to convince myself I'd imagined it. Then the voice returned, closer this time, layered with something I couldn't place. Older, thinner, almost human. "Michael." Hearing my first name broke something in me. Only family used it on duty. Never strangers. Never out here. I felt the skin on my arms tighten beneath my sleeves as the fog shifted, drawing inward, as if leaning closer to listen. I swept the light again, faster now, searching for a prank, a lost hiker, anything that fit inside the rules I understood. Nothing answered the beam. The name came again. Softer, repeated from more than one direction at once, overlapping slightly, like an echo without a source. That was when I realized the forest hadn't gone silent earlier. It had been listening. The single voice didn't disappear. It multiplied. What had spoken my name once came back layered, stacked, repeated in perfect timing, as if several mouths were sharing the same breath. The fog around me thickened and shifted, not drifting, but organizing itself, pulling inward until my small circle of light felt like a stage surrounded by an unseen audience. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, yet my feet stayed planted, heavy and unresponsive. The voices spoke together, not loudly, not urgently. Calm, patient. Their tone carried no emotion I could recognize, only certainty. They didn't shout questions or issue threats. They spoke statements, finished thoughts, complete and rehearsed. When one paused, all paused. When one resumed, all resumed. It was wrong in a way that set my teeth on edge, like listening to a recording played slightly out of sync with reality. I turned slowly, trying to pinpoint a direction, but the sound didn't behave like sound should. It came from everywhere and nowhere, sliding through the trees, pressing close to my ears, then withdrawing again. The fog seemed to react to it, rising and falling in time with the words, as if the forest itself were part of the conversation. I told myself it was exhaustion. Long hours, isolation, the mind filling in gaps when faced with uncertainty. That explanation lasted exactly as long as it took for the voices to say my badge number out loud, every digit spoken clean and precise. The last trace of denial drained out of me then. Whatever was speaking knew me, and it hadn't just found my name, it had been waiting for it. After the badge number, they didn't pause for my reaction. They continued as if reading from a file laid open in the dark. They recited my unlisted home address first, every number correct, the street name pronounced the way only locals ever got right. Then my wife's maiden name, followed by the name of my daughter's elementary school, spoken slowly, carefully, like they wanted me to understand there were no limits to what they could reach. Each detail landed heavier than the last, stacking in my chest until breathing took effort. I felt exposed in a way no suspect had ever made me feel. This wasn't information you pulled from public records or overheard conversations. These were pieces of my life that existed behind locked doors, things I had protected by habit and trust. I demanded to know who they were, my voice sharp, rehearsed, clinging to authority. The words echoed briefly and died in the fog. The chorus didn't acknowledge the question. Instead, they moved on, peeling back layers I hadn't known could be touched. They mentioned the exact model of the car I drove off duty, the scar on my left hand from a training accident years earlier, the nickname my wife used when no one else was around. With each revelation, the forest felt closer, tighter, as if the trees were leaning in to hear what came next. The realization settled slowly, and then all at once. These voices weren't discovering anything. They weren't guessing. They were recalling. Whatever spoke to me in that fog knew my life the way memory knows it, intimate and complete. Standing there, stripped down to facts I couldn't deny. I understood that my badge didn't make me an authority here. It made me an entry. They waited before saying it, letting the silence stretch until my nerves filled the gap on their own. When the chorus returned, its tone didn't change, but the words did. They slowed, as if savoring what they were about to unwrap. They spoke my brother's name first. Tommy. No last name, no context, just the name. Soft and precise, like it had been kept carefully all these years. My stomach tightened. No one on the force knew about Tommy. I never spoke of him. I didn't need to hear the rest to know where it was going. But the voices continued anyway. They described the summer of 1961. The creek, the heat, the way the water looked shallow until it wasn't. Then they told me where I had been standing on the bank, how my back was turned, how the pages of a comic book were stuck together with sweat. They named it without hesitation. Superman, Shoe 147. I felt something tear loose inside my chest. My knees buckled, and I caught myself against a tree, bark scraping through my sleeve. I hadn't remembered that detail in years. I'd buried it so deeply, I'd convinced myself it no longer mattered. The voices repeated the moment with unbearable clarity, describing the sound I didn't hear until it was too late. The silence afterward, the way guilt settled in and never left. They didn't accuse me. They didn't comfort me. They simply stated it, like a fact recorded long ago. That was worse than judgment. As the fog pressed closer, I realized they weren't telling me my secrets to frighten me. They were proving something. They knew me before I ever set foot on Highway 49, and they had been patient enough to wait until I finally walked close enough to listen. The fog began to thin in places, peeling back in, slow, uneven strips, and shapes emerged where there had been nothing before. At first, I thought my eyes were adjusting, grasping at patterns in the dark, but the figures remained even when I stopped moving. People stood among the trees, scattered at irregular distances, all facing the same direction, deeper into the forest. None of them acknowledged me. None of them reacted to the light sweeping across their faces. They looked wrong in subtle ways. Their expressions were blank, eyes open, but unfocused, as if whatever animated them had already moved on. The clothes told a stranger story. One man wore a heavy wool coat, cut in a style I recognized from old photographs, early 20th century, buttons dull with age. A woman nearby stood in a faded dress that might have been fashionable in the 1950s, her hair pinned carefully in place. Farther back, I caught the shape of a uniform that belonged to another war entirely. They weren't transparent. They cast shadows when the light hit them just right. They were solid, present, and completely indifferent to my existence. The forest accommodated them easily, branches parting around still bodies as if they'd always been there. I realized then that these weren't apparitions in the way movies teach you to expect. They were something else. Something paused as my beam moved across the line of faces. A terrible pattern formed in my mind. These people hadn't arrived together. They belonged to different decades, different lives, different endings. Yet here they stood, gathered in the same place, oriented toward the same unseen destination, watching them. I understood that Highway 49 didn't just take people, it kept them, arranging them carefully, patiently, until the road decided it was time to move again. I didn't recognize him at first. My light passed over the figures slowly, cataloging coats, faces, eras, until it caught on something familiar and refused to move on. A man stood slightly apart from the others, closer to the edge of the trees, dressed in modern clothes that didn't belong among the wool and pressed cotton. Jeans, a light jacket, running shoes dusted with dirt. My stomach dropped before my mind caught up. Marcus Webb looked exactly as he had in his driver's license photo, only drained of life in a way a photograph never could be. His eyes were open, staring forward without focus, his mouth relaxed, almost peaceful. He wasn't injured. He wasn't struggling. His posture suggested motion paused mid-thought, as if he'd been walking and simply stopped responding to the world around him. I said his name, louder than I meant to. Marcus! The sound fell flat, swallowed by fog before it reached him. There was no flinch, no recognition. He didn't turn. Standing there, feet planted on the same ground where his footprints had ended. I felt a wave of helplessness I hadn't known since my first year on the job. This wasn't a man hiding or hurt. This was a man already gone. The realization hit hard and fast. The footprints hadn't ended because he vanished. They ended because he'd arrived. Marcus hadn't been taken by force or dragged into the trees. He had walked here, step by step, until the road decided his journey was complete, looking at him among the others. I understood with sick clarity that this wasn't an isolated incident. This was a procession, and Marcus Webb was simply the newest addition, waiting patiently for the signal to move again. The voices returned the moment I stopped saying Marcus's name, rising together out of the fog like they had been waiting for my attention to shift. This time, they didn't whisper. They spoke clearly, evenly, with the calm confidence of something stating an obvious truth. "Join us, Michael." The words wrapped around me from every direction, settling into my ears with unsettling familiarity. I felt a pull then, not a physical force, but a suggestion so strong it bordered on instinct. The figures ahead began to move, their first steps slow and synchronized, feet lifting and setting down without sound. The forest opened for them, branches parting just enough to let the line pass through without resistance. "Everyone stops here eventually," the chorus continued. "Mile marker 47. I took an involuntary step forward before I realized what I was doing. The fog felt warmer now, thicker, brushing against my face and hands like something alive. For a brief, terrifying moment, the idea of joining them made sense. No confusion, no fear, just walking, just letting go of questions and weight and memory. I saw Marcus move again, his body responding smoothly, as if it had never paused at all. Others followed, their blank expressions unchanged as they disappeared deeper into the trees. The invitation lingered, patient and open, waiting for my agreement rather than demanding it. That was when something inside me rebelled. A sharp, instinctive refusal flared up, cutting through the pull. I stepped back, heart pounding, breaking whatever alignment had begun to form. The voices didn't grow angry. They didn't argue. They simply waited, certain that time was on their side, and that sooner or later, I would take the step they already knew my name for. When the voices spoke again, they did so with the tone of instructors correcting a misunderstanding. They explained that I was standing in the wrong place, looking at the wrong version of things. Highway 49, the one I patrolled night after night, was only a surface. Beneath it, beside it, threaded through it like a shadow, ran another road. They called it the true Highway 40I, a path laid down long before asphalt and mile markers, existing where boundaries wore thin. As they spoke, the forest shifted. The fog peeled back to reveal a faint line running between the trees, straight and narrow, like a road remembered rather than built. The ground along it was smoother, darker, pressed flat by countless unseen steps. It didn't reflect my light properly, absorbing it in a dull sheen that made depth hard to judge. Looking at it made my eyes ache, as if I were trying to focus on something meant to be seen only in passing. They told me this road mirrored the world I knew, touching it at certain points, crossing it at others. Mile marker 47 was one of those intersections, a place where the separation thinned enough for people to wander across without realizing it. Not everyone noticed the shift. Most didn't resist it. They simply felt the pull and followed. Listening to them, I felt my understanding stretch and warp. This wasn't a story about ghosts or hallucinations. It was about infrastructure I had never been trained to see, a route that had always existed alongside the one I trusted. Standing there, with the true road laid bare before me, I realized the danger wasn't that it was hidden. The danger was how easily it could be mistaken for just another way forward. They spoke my partner's name without hesitation, sliding it into the conversation like a footnote I was supposed to recognize. Johnson. They told me he had been here before, 3 months earlier, on a night that looked ordinary until it wasn't. The fog, the stopped car, the feeling that something was waiting just beyond the shoulder. He had seen the figures between the trees, heard the first whisper of his name, felt the same pull tightening in his chest. The difference, they said, was that Johnson never stepped out of his cruiser. He stayed behind glass and steel, hands locked on the steering wheel, eyes fixed forward while the fog pressed in around him. He didn't follow the footprints. He didn't answer when the voices tested him. He waited until the sensation passed, until the road returned to something that looked familiar enough to survive. I remembered how he'd been after that night. Quieter, edgier. The way he avoided eye contact when Highway 49 came up in conversation. The sudden transfer request that moved him to day shift without explanation. At the time, I'd chalked it up to stress or family issues. Standing there now, I understood it had been fear, controlled and unspoken. The voices didn't mock him for leaving. They didn't criticize his caution. They spoke of him with a mild, almost amused respect. He had recognized the boundary and chosen to stay on his side of it. They implied that choice was temporary, not permanent. A delay, not an escape. That was when I grasped the final insult buried in their story. Johnson hadn't been spared. He had simply postponed his turn. And so had I, until the night I decided to step out of the car and walk closer than I ever should have. The chorus spoke those words with quiet certainty, as if they were reciting a rule rather than issuing a warning. Everyone stops here. Mile marker 47 wasn't special because of a curse or a single event. It was a convergence, a thinning, a place where motion slowed enough for choices to be made without realizing a choice existed. The road bent just enough there. The forest pressed close enough. The fog lingered long enough for the other path to reveal itself. They told me it didn't matter who you were or how long you delayed. Travelers, settlers, officers, families, anyone who passed often enough eventually felt the pull. Some followed it immediately. Others circled the place for years, finding reasons to return, convincing themselves it was coincidence. The result was always the same. One night, the boundary would open a little wider, and the road beside reality would accept another walker. As they spoke, images pressed into my mind uninvited, wagons rolling into the trees in the 1800s, early automobiles stalling in the dark, modern headlights blinking patiently while their drivers stepped out, drawn by a feeling they couldn't name. The procession I had seen wasn't random. It was organized by time, layered by decade. Each group added when the road decided it was ready. The voices ended the explanation without drama. They didn't ask me to agree. They didn't threaten consequences. They simply stated that knowing the rule didn't exempt me from it. Standing at the edge of the true Highway 49, I understood the cruelty of their certainty. This wasn't a trap that snapped shut. It was a destination, and the only question that remained was how long I could pretend I wasn't already on my way there. I didn't decide to run so much as my body made the choice before my mind could argue. The realization that there was no safe direction snapped something loose in me, and I turned away from the true road on pure instinct. Branches clawed at my sleeves as I pushed through the trees, boots slipping on damp soil, breath tearing out of my lungs in sharp bursts. I wasn't following the footprints back. I was fleeing from the idea that there was a right way to go, and that I was already facing it. The forest blurred as I moved, fog breaking apart and reforming around me in thick waves. I kept expecting to break through to the shoulder of the highway, to see the familiar wash of asphalt and reflective paint. But every step carried me deeper into something unfamiliar. The ground sloped strangely, angles wrong beneath my feet, as if the terrain itself had been rearranged. The silence pressed close, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the distant echo of voices I refused to listen to. When I finally burst out of the trees, the road waiting for me wasn't the one I knew. The asphalt was cracked and uneven, its surface dull and lifeless, stretching into the fog without lane markings or signs. No guardrails, no reflectors, just a dead strip of pavement leading nowhere. I skidded to a stop, heart hammering, staring down a version of Highway 49 that felt like a memory gone bad. In that moment, I understood I hadn't escaped. I had simply chosen a different mistake. I hadn't run back to safety. I had run sideways, straight into a place where the rules I depended on no longer existed at all. The first engine sound came from behind me, low and uneven, like something struggling to remember how it was supposed to run. Headlights bloomed through the fog, yellow and dim, not cutting the darkness so much as staining it. I stepped backward onto the shoulder out of reflex, raising a hand to signal the driver, already forming the words I'd say. The car never slowed. It passed straight through me. There was no impact, no resistance, just an instant of unbearable cold, sharp and invasive, like my blood had been replaced with ice water. My breath tore itself out of my chest as the vehicle continued on, its shape resolving briefly into something impossibly old. A Model T. Black paint, dull with age. Driver rigid behind the wheel, eyes fixed forward. He didn't see me, or he chose not to. More followed. A 1950s Cadillac, chrome flashing faintly, a boxy sedan from the 70s. They moved in a steady line, engines overlapping, tires making no sound on the cracked pavement. Each one passed through me in turn, stealing heat, stealing strength, leaving me weaker and shaking. I dropped to one knee, hands pressed to the ground, trying to stay solid, trying to remember how it felt to exist. I could hear sirens then, real ones, modern. My radio crackled to life with my name, distant but unmistakable. Relief flared and died just as fast when the voices returned, close and amused. "They can't reach you," they said. "You're not where they are." As another car slid through my body, I understood the truth of it. I wasn't standing on a road anymore. I was standing in traffic that never stopped, surrounded by travelers who had taken this route long before me and never found a way off. I don't know how long I knelt there, letting the ghost traffic bleed through me, but I know the cold was winning. My hands trembled uncontrollably, fingers numb and unresponsive, my thoughts starting to scatter the way they do right before shock sets in. The voices hovered close, no longer pressing, no longer persuading. They waited. That terrified me more than anything they had said so far. The radio crackled again, louder this time. Dispatch. Another unit. My name repeating through static like a lifeline stretched thin. I tried to answer and failed, my jaw locking around words that wouldn't come. Panic surged, sharp and blinding, and with it came the certainty that if I let go for even a second, I wouldn't come back from wherever I was slipping. So I thought of my wife. Patricia's laugh, the way it surprised her every time it escaped, the scar above her eyebrow she hated, and I loved. Then my daughter, Emma, missing her front teeth, holding my hand too tightly whenever we crossed a street. I said their names out loud, forcing sound past my frozen lips. Again. Louder. Over and over, like a prayer I had never needed before. Something shifted. The road shuddered beneath me, the fog thinning just enough for color to bleed back in. The ghost engines faded, replaced by the sharp, real wail of sirens. Warmth crept painfully back into my limbs as the world snapped into focus. Brutal and solid. I collapsed forward, palms burning against real asphalt, sobbing without shame. Behind me, The voices receded, not angry, not disappointed. Certain. They knew my anchors had held, for now. I didn't go home after the hospital cleared me. I couldn't. Sleep felt dangerous, like closing my eyes might put me back on that road. Instead, I drove to the county library just after it opened, still wearing the same uniform. Fog dried stiff along the cuffs of my pants. The building smelled of paper and dust and disinfectant. A comfortingly normal scent. I needed records, dates, proof that what I'd seen had a history. I started with local newspapers, scrolling through microfilm until my eyes burned. It didn't take long. Mentions of Highway 49 surfaced again and again, scattered across decades like breadcrumbs. Missing persons, abandoned vehicles, search efforts that turned up nothing and quietly stopped being funded. The language shifted with the years, but the pattern stayed the same. A car found near mile marker 47, no signs of struggle, no bodies recovered. Further back, the stories grew thinner. Stranger. An 1887 article described a wagon train that failed to arrive at its destination. 43 people. Men. Women. Children. Their last recorded location placed them near the same stretch of forest. No explanation offered. Just speculation and silence. I sat back in my chair, heart pounding, realizing the procession I'd seen wasn't symbolic. It was historical. By the time I finished, my hands were shaking again. This wasn't an anomaly. It wasn't new. Highway 49 had been taking people long before patrol cars and mile markers existed. All I had done was stumble into the record of it. Written quietly in ink and forgotten ink. Waiting for someone foolish enough to read it closely. The deeper I went, the more familiar the names became. Not familiar to the public, but to the job. I recognized the formatting of police reports immediately. The clipped language, the careful omissions, the way uncertainty was buried under procedure. One file stood out. Officer Gerald Mills, 1978. His report described fog behaving abnormally, a stopped vehicle near mile marker 47, and voices he could not identify. The final note stated he had resigned voluntarily 2 weeks later. No follow-up, no psych evaluation on record. He relocated to Vermont. Another file followed. Deputy Carl Kowalski, 1985. His account was more cautious, filled with crossed-out sentences and rewritten conclusions. He mentioned figures in the trees, a sensation of being watched, and an overwhelming urge to leave the area. Kowalski transferred to another county, then inexplicably returned years later to Highway 49 on his own time. The final entry was brief. His car was found abandoned. No body recovered. I sat there reading, realizing the pattern extended beyond civilians. Officers didn't disappear immediately. They survived the first encounter. They carried it with them, tried to outrun it, buried it under new assignments and fresh starts. Some succeeded for a while. Others felt the pull grow stronger, more insistent, until they came back. What chilled me most was how neatly everything was contained. No press, no internal investigations, just quiet exits and closed files. The department hadn't ignored the problem. They had learned how to manage it by letting those who saw too much remove themselves, staring at those reports. I understood I wasn't the first officer to break. I was just the next one who'd lived long enough to read the names that came before me. Once I knew what to look for, the gaps became impossible to ignore. Reports ended too cleanly. Evidence logs stopped mid-thought. Follow-up dates were penciled in and never filled. Cases tied to Highway 49 didn't close so much as fade. Quietly redirected into administrative dead ends, where no one asked questions anymore. This wasn't negligence, it was design. I pulled internal memos next, the kind never meant for public eyes. Language like resource reallocation and jurisdictional overlap appeared again and again, always in reference to mile marker 47. Search efforts were limited by weather, then terrain, then budget. Eventually, they were stopped entirely. Families were given condolences, not answers. Officers were offered transfers, not counseling. Those who accepted were forgotten. Those who didn't eventually returned to the road. The most damning realization came slowly, settling like dust. No one had ever ordered a full investigation because no one wanted one. The pattern was understood well enough to avoid, not to confront. Highway 49 was treated like a fault line, something you built around, something you learned to live with, as long as the disappearances stayed sparse and the reports stayed vague. The system held. I closed the files with shaking hands. This wasn't a secret hidden by a single corrupt official. It was institutional memory, passed down quietly, officer to officer, administrator to administrator. Don't linger. Don't document too much. If you feel the pull, leave. That was when I knew I couldn't stay. The badge didn't protect people here. It protected the silence. And the longer I wore it, the closer I came to becoming just another name filed away. Another gap someone else would eventually notice, if they were unlucky enough to look. It didn't end when I left Oregon. That was the lie I told myself while packing boxes, while watching the trees thin out as we drove east, while signing papers for a house that felt safely distant from Highway 49. I believed distance mattered. I believed roads could be outrun. I was wrong. Every night, without fail. My eyes open at 3:33 a.m. Not 3:32. Not 3:34. The number is burned into me now, as familiar as my own name. I don't wake up slowly. There are no dreams to fade, no gentle drift into awareness. I am pulled straight out of sleep, heart already racing, breath caught halfway in, as if something has called me back to consciousness. The room is always silent, too silent. Patricia sleeps beside me, her breathing steady and unaware. Emma's room down the hall remains dark. Nothing is visibly wrong, and yet I lie there, rigid, afraid to move, afraid that the slightest sound will answer something waiting on the other side of the quiet. Sometimes I swear I can hear it then. Whispers just below hearing, stretching the space between seconds, testing to see if I'm listening. The pull is subtle, but relentless. A sense of direction without a destination. An urge to go somewhere I can't see, but know exists. I feel it in my chest. The same pressure I felt standing in the fog. The same wrong certainty that there is a road nearby, and it hasn't forgotten me. 28 years have passed. The nights haven't missed one yet. Whatever waits at mile marker 47 doesn't need me to be there to remind me that. Eventually, it expects me to come back. This is why I'm writing any of this down. Not for closure, not for forgiveness. I don't believe either exists where Highway 49 is concerned. I'm writing because patterns only stay hidden as long as people don't compare notes, and because the road depends on silence more than fog. If even one person recognizes the signs early enough, maybe they'll do what I didn't. If you're driving at night and see a car stopped where it shouldn't be, don't tell yourself you're being helpful. Help is a story we use to justify stepping closer. If the door is open and the engine is cold, keep driving. If the hazards are blinking patiently, keep driving faster. Especially if there's fog that doesn't behave like fog should. Fog that waits. Fog that thickens when you slow down. Do not follow footprints into the trees. Not even a few steps. Not even to check. Distance matters more than intent. The moment you leave the road, you're negotiating with something that doesn't need your permission. And if you hear your name spoken clearly, calmly, in a voice that knows how to say it, don't answer. Answering is agreement, even if you don't realize it yet. I know how this sounds. I spent most of my life dismissing warnings that couldn't be quantified. But some dangers don't announce themselves with violence. They invite. They wait. They let you believe you're still in control right up until the point you aren't. If you take nothing else from this, remember one thing. Heroes disappear faster than cowards on Highway 49. Survival isn't about doing the right thing. It's about refusing to do anything at all. There's one last thing I need to say, and it's the hardest part to put into words. The pull hasn't weakened with time. It's grown quieter, more patient, like it knows it doesn't need to rush anymore. Cancer has a way of stripping things down to essentials, and lately I can feel the boundary thinning again. The same pressure I felt in the fog, the same sense of alignment trying to reassert itself. The voices haven't spoken aloud, but I don't need them to. I already know what they're waiting for. When I'm gone, there may be questions. There are always questions. If, in the days or weeks after my death, someone reports seeing an old man in an outdated state trooper uniform walking calmly into the woods, especially near a stretch of road marked 47, I need this to be clear. Don't look for me. Don't organize a search. Don't convince yourself you can bring me back. I won't be lost. I'm afraid that death doesn't end the walk. I'm afraid it only removes the last anchor holding me in place. Whatever Highway 49 connects to doesn't care whether you're alive or dying. It cares that you belong to it, that you've heard your name spoken in the right place at the right time. If my body fails, I don't know what will be left to resist that call. So let me go. Let me disappear quietly, without reports or markers or boots in the dirt, trying to follow where I've gone. If you've read this far, you already know how the road works. Curiosity is enough. Concern is enough. Love is enough to pull you in. Please understand, this isn't a request for help. It's a warning. Don't follow me.